So this fish tank stand project started with a little boy and a game of Roblox. So for context, my little buddy likes to play Roblox, and one day he was playing Roblox and wandering around in one of the worlds, or I guess in game, and somebody, one of the artists or whatever, had actually put a crate with a fishbowl on top of it, and he had seen this and thought it was pretty neat. And this was shortly after we had just gotten him his fish tank, and he called me into his room to see it. I saw it and I was like, that's pretty neat. And he said, can you make my fish tank stand look like that? I said, I'm not sure I can or not, but we'll give it a try. So for reference, we weren't able to find that world again, but I was able to go online and dig through some pictures of Roblox assets, and the crate looks something like this. Now imagine that with a fishbowl on top of it, and that's pretty much what he saw. So that's the inspiration for this fish tank stand. And what we ended up with is this. Not necessarily a one-to-one, but if I do say so myself, it doesn't look too bad. Anyway, that's what I'm building today, is that fish tank stand. Stick around and watch. The stand we're building is intended to hold what is commonly referred to as a 30 long. Most tanks of this type have the same footprint of 30 1/4 by 12 1/2 inches. We start by taking measurements to make sure. Once measurements have been, measured, we go on to the design phase. Having a design that we're happy with, we verify that with some outside opinions. Outstanding. Next, it was on to picking material and breaking it down. I could have used a pine plywood, which has a nice base golden color, but that's a pain to sand and finish nicely enough for what I wanted. Instead, I opted for a maple veneer plywood that has a nice harder core and fewer likely voids. Plus, it has a finish-ready veneer that requires very little sanding and takes most stains and finishes nicely. With the material selected, we start breaking it down into more manageable pieces. The primary focus for this step in the build is the main carcass. Since this stand is basically a custom-sized cabinet, we're going to build the shell of this stand using pretty standard cabinet building processes. We start with the back, sides, bottom shelf, the upper and lower face boards, and a few other pieces to cut into stringers and other bits later on. The pieces are broken down a little oversized, by 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, so they can be trimmed later on at the table saw if necessary. Ta-da! The sides will be attached to the back with screws later on, but for the sake of alignment, we're going to use 5/16 inch dowels. 3 dowels should be more than enough for the purpose, so that's what we'll do. Here I'm using a self-centering doweling jig from Miles Craft. A link to this and all other tools will be in the video description. We use the alignment posts on one side of the jig to line up to our desired holes. Then, with a 5/16 inch brad point drill bit and our desired depth identified, we drill holes into the edge of our boards that will make up the sides of the stand. We repeat this for all the holes we'll need on both side boards and test to make sure the dowels stick out the way we want them. We can use the jig to touch up any dowel holes if we need to. Next, we'll place some dowels back into the holes we just drilled and place our jig on those dowels to adjust the jig stop. Now we lay our doweled board on top of our backboard, flush the top and bottom edges, and use the jig to find where to drill the holes for our dowels to join the two boards together. After we drill the matching holes in the backboard, we do another dry fit. And if we did things right, we should have a nice flush fit. Just like so. Ain't that pretty? One of the requests from the zookeeper, aka Mom, was for an adjustable second shelf. Using the Craig shelf pin jig, we drill holes along the inside face of our sides. This jig makes things super easy, just like jigs are supposed to, I guess. We line the bottom up and drill each hole to the appropriate depth. We can drill all the holes at once, or we can use the included pin to keep things lined up. Just insert the pin into the bottom hole of the jig, then into one of the holes you already drilled. You can keep drilling shelf pin holes just by leapfrogging with this pin in any previously drilled hole. We do yet another dry fit, including the upper and lower faceboards. From this, I can take measurements for the two side faceboards. These side faceboards will hold the doors we build later on and provide a little more support for the thin upper faceboard. They will also carry the decorative riveted theme all the way around the face of the cabinet. We take some of our offcuts and use the crosscut sled to cut the side face pieces down to size. I was kinda picky about the pieces I used here. I wanted the color and grain patterns to roughly match the upper and lower faceboards, or have some interesting little quirk to add a roughed up crate look. With these cut to fit, we do another dry fit and take any final measurements for the bottom shelf to trim that to size if needed. Turns out that I didn't need to trim down the bottom shelf. We'll just move on to drilling out the pockets for the pocket screws using the Craig pocket hole jiginator. For the pocket holes, we're doing 3 along the long sides and 1 centered on each of the short sides of the shelf. Then I dry fit with the shelf in for one final check before moving on to the next step. Sanding. Show me a woodworker that enjoys sanding and I will show you a lunatic. Thankfully, the veneer on this plywood is already mostly sanded, so a light hand sanding with 320 grit is all that's needed. You don't want to use an orbital sander on veneered plywoods because the veneer is usually paper thin and an orbital sander will eat right through that super quick. With the sanding done, this would not be a YouTube woodworking video without the obligatory appearance of Rubio Monica. All joking aside, I could have used a stain and 1 or 2 coats of polyurethane to finish this. I chose Rubio because it really is simple. Just 1 coat and you're done. I'm using the pure oil here because I know from previous experience that I'll get a nice golden brown on the maple, which is what I was looking for. Just apply some liberal amounts, rub it in really good, give it a few minutes to set, and then wipe off the excess. Also, I have to agree with Jason from Bourbon Moth. This stuff just smells so dang nice. I've let the Rubio set for a few days because, well, I had other things that I had to do before moving on to my next step, which is making my holes for the desired riveted appearance. Working on the back side of the backer board, I use a yardstick and a center punch to mark out where my screws are going to go. I'm using my Amana countersink bit after marking my holes with the center punch to pre-drill and countersink. This bit has been one of my favorite tool buys in a very long time. It's super handy, easy to use, and the free spinning depth stop guarantees uniform countersink holes. I've finished preparing the back of the stand for assembly. Now it's time to start assembling. Since the screws I'll be using will be holding everything together, I only use a very light bead of Type Bond 3. Since this will be holding a fish tank with water and there's going to be moisture all around, it just made sense to use Type Bond 3 because, as legend tells, it's waterproof. Plus, that's just what I had handy at the time. I put the side in place, making sure to line up my dowels, and added a few clamps. The clamps are honestly only needed to hold things together long enough for me to insert the screws from the back. So with 3 simple squeeze clamps holding the back and side together, I add a couple of 90-degree quarter clamps just to keep things nice and square. After making sure my clamps are tight and the corners are square, I wipe off any squeeze out. I flip the whole thing over so I can access the holes I drilled into the back and start locking things together with some 1 5/8 inch black trim head screws. With the sharp point and self-tapping design, they go in super easy. With one side done, I repeat the process for the other side. It would appear that I lost footage of me attaching the bottom shelf to the sides and back with the pocket screws, but as you can see here, the bottom shelf is in place. So I move on to adding the lower faceboard to the front of the stand. Then I'll lock this faceboard in place with the 3 remaining pocket holes. And check square. I attach the upper faceboard to the sides of the stand with 2 of the same trim screws on each side, and then I'm ready to start attaching the side faceboards. As you can see here, I already have one of the side faceboards attached and I'm working on the second one. I start with another light bead of Type Bond 3. Since I'm going to use the same trim screws on these faces, the glue isn't really necessary. But that's not going to stop me. See? With the glue on the edge and the side face in place, I give it a little help getting settled with a couple of clamps. Then I get my yardstick and my center punch and start marking out the screw holes to match the other side. It's about now that the client comes to check on my work and asks silly questions. I'm starting to get a little concerned that he was going to change up the design requirements just as I'm nearly done with the project. We go back and forth. It's a rough negotiation. Thankfully, I'm able to convince him that the current design is the best option. While I have the side faceboard clamped, I find the center and mark it. Then I countersink and pre-drill again before putting in a trim screw just to hold things down. Of course, the client just can't leave me alone to get on with my work. As I'm trying to finish locking in the side faceboard, he decides to take this opportunity for his 15 seconds of fame. Look at him. Like he thinks I'm not paying attention. Hey buddy, this is my channel. Get your own. Now that I have the top and side faceboards in place, and I've started the riveted look along the sides, it's time to make the rivets along the bottom. I'm just going to add more trim screws right into the bottom shelf because why not? I space things out so I don't run into the pocket screws while I'm doing this. Pre-drill, countersink, and then add the trim screws. Before you know it, we're all done with the bottom faceboard. To complete the appearance, I need to do something similar with the top. First, I add a stringer centered at the top of the stand. I also add a 1-inch strip of cutoff beneath the stringer, and I hold it in place with a couple of brad nails. I make sure that the strip is inset from the top evenly using a scrap piece of 3/4. This strip is so that I can add trim screws along the upper face without sharp screw points sticking out inside the stand. I could have cut them off after installing, but I didn't want to. I replicate the pattern of the screws from the lower faceboard along the upper faceboard. Finally, I drive in more of the trim screws. It's taken a little while to get here, but I now have the basic tank stand done and looking just the way I imagined. I'll use some compressed air to blow out any little bits of dust and such. And viola, a tank stand carcass. With the carcass complete, I can now take measurement for the doors. The idea was to have the doors look like the cartoonish vision of the side of a crate. You know, with wood strips along the top and sides and a strap of wood slanted through the center. The easiest way to achieve this look is to go shaker style. I don't know about you, but I've often wondered if you can tongue and groove plywood like you would normally do to make a shaker style door with solid wood. As it turns out, you can indeed, because I just did. See? I made grooves on all the strips just wide enough for a piece of 1/4-inch plywood to fit snugly. Then with my crosscut sled and my table saw blade, just high enough to match the groove, I cut through the ends of 4 of my strips that make up the sides, about 1/4 of an inch from the ends. Now I need to cut those little bits off to make the tongues. So I head over to my bandsaw and do that for those 4 sideboards I prepped just a minute ago. With my fence set at the right distance, I gently push the board through, snipping off those little bits, and we have tongues. After that, I do a dry fit of all the sides to get a measurement for the 1/4-inch plywood that would be inserted into the groove. Then I cut 1/4-inch plywood to that size. I also cut 2 more pieces of 1/4-inch ply, just small enough to fit inside the edges of each door. I'm going to use these as backer boards behind the plywood door panels. This will make the doors a little more sturdy and give me something for screws to bite into when I add the slanted strips to the front. Now that I have all my 1/4-inch plywood panels cut, I do a dry fit of all the pieces, making sure that the door panel fits tightly inside the grooves and that the rails and stiles connect up nice and flush. I wanted the fit to be really snug, and boy did I achieve that. These panels won't need much glue, and that's a good thing. This is because I'm going to finish the pieces with more Rubio before the glue up, and I don't want any glue squeeze out messing up the finish. I take a couple of strips of 1/4-inch plywood that are about 2 inches wide and line them up on the dry fit door with the ends on opposite corners. And I mark center. I'm going to use these strips to create the center straps for the front of the doors. With the center marked on each end, I line those up with the corners and follow the line of the inside edges of the door to mark my cuts. I bring the lines in from the edge a little bit, maybe about 1/16 of an inch. I want a noticeable spacing between the straps and the door edges to add to the cartoonish look. I'll then take these strips over to my bandsaw and cut these little corners off. With the corners cut, I sand the edges down a little more to make sure I have good spacing. I take the strips back to the door to check the fit, and what do you know? While you weren't looking, I sanded, finished with some more Rubio, and glued up the doors. Just kidding. I can't find the footage for that part either. But I really did do all those things, as you can kind of see here. With my doors finished and placed where I want them, I put the hinges just in place and mark out the holes that I'm going to need. We're on the home stretch now. With the hinges lined up to my marks, I use a self-centering bit to set the holes for me to attach the hinges to the doors. These bits are a great investment for anyone who uses hinges a lot. You can't see it here, but I also use the same bit to set the holes in the edge of the side of the faceboards. Then I just have to add screws and the hinges are done, dude. To make things easy for leveling the stand, I'm using these leveling feet that I ordered from woodcraft.com. These feet are great for this project, but many others, because not only can you level things normally by unscrewing from the feet side, you can also use a hex key in the top of the post to make any fine adjustments needed. Provided, that is, you can get to the post from above. Crap. Forget you saw that. To space the leveling feet, I'm using a cut-off piece of 3/4 ply to bring the feet in just about 1.5 inches from the back of the stand. I remove the foot and post from one of the brackets, place it where I wanted, and using a pencil through the center, I mark a position to drill. I use a small drill bit and go all the way through the bottom shelf. Doing this will give me a good center point on both sides of the board. I follow up making the hole bigger with a 3/4 inch Forstner bit. Now I only drill part of the way through with the Forstner bit on this side of the board. Then I will finish the hole from the other side. This is to prevent tear out. And I'll use these holes to allow me to access the top of the post on each leveler foot to fine tune them with a hex key. You may notice that the front feet are closer to the front of the stand than the back feet are to the back of the stand. This is because I installed the front feet before considering the tack strips for the back feet. I figured since the feet are not likely to be visible, it didn't really matter enough to reposition them and make all new holes in the bottom shelf. With the leveler feet attached, I attached the top of the tank stand with 1.5 inch wood screws through the stringers from the inside of the cabinet to lock the top on. And there we have the final tank stand with a riveted look and looking like the crate the client saw in Roblox.
So, there are probably a bunch of people screaming at the screen right now or down in the comments. Those aren't shaker style doors. You got your rails and stiles all backwards. To you, I say, yeah, I know. I kind of did that on purpose. The whole goal for this tank stand was to make it look like it was yanked out of Roblox. So the rails and stiles being backwards and mixed up on the doors kind of accentuated that cartoonish look. That's kind of because video game designers don't always replicate the real world thing exactly. They'll tend to add just something that hints to the real world thing. And that's kind of what we were looking for. So, yeah, rails and stiles backwards, it still looks good. In any case, it was a fun project. It took me a little bit longer than I would have liked. That's because I was filming and doing my regular day job in the process. Normally, a project like this would have taken me about 2 days to complete, and that's including letting any stains or finishes to letting them cure. But yeah, this took a little bit longer. Like the kids say these days, if you enjoyed the video, please like it, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to check out the video description for links to all the products, jigs, and tools that I used. And yeah, just remember, hack it, saw it, whatever you do, just make it. And I'll catch you in the next one.